What's up, everybody? Professor Calderon here. Another video, another week. Censorship and self-regulation. So you have this industry, this powerful medium of communication, and the most powerful that man has ever seen, cinema. Now, government is stepping in and having it say so in what gets made and what doesn't get made. So here we go. Page 235. When applied to cinema, the term censorship often conflates between two distinct practices: government-administered systems of control over the expression of political ideas in film, and self-regulated operated by entertainment cinema industries to ensure that the content of films conform to moral, social, and ideological mores of their national culture. So there are two sort of approaches on this, or not approaches, but two pronged approach to this. Yeah, for lack of a better word. When a government would step into the industry in its nation and say, boom, you guys are going to stop making these types of movie, and you're going to start making this type of movie, a movie that reflects our national ideals, as opposed to movies that express American ideas or another country's ideas or bad morals. Sorry. The other flip side to that was self-regulation, where members of the industry themselves come together and say, we're going to police ourselves to make sure that a certain type of film is made and not made. For example, we're not going to make films that glorify violence, because we are a society that looks down on violence. We don't want violence in our society, so we're not going to glorify it in our films. And we're going to police ourselves to make sure that that doesn't happen. Okay, so those are the two approaches. Although film, here's an interesting note: the origins of film censorship. Film has always been more closely regulated than other forms of communication. Cinema censorship cannot be directly equated with censorship of the press or other publications because, for most of their history, films have not been granted a legally protected status as speech. Film is not given the same status as protected speech. Like in America, we have freedom of speech. You make a film, your film does not have that same type of protective status as freedom of speech. In a 1915 decision that established the legal status of cinema in the United States, the Supreme Court declared the exhibition of motion pictures to be a business, pure and simple. Okay, there's no freedom of speech there. They were thus not protected by the First Amendment's guarantee of freedom of speech, but liable to prior censorship by state and municipal authorities. This legal definition of cinema as outside the sphere of politics and art is itself an implicit form of censorship. So this debate of censorship rages on during this period, 1915. Both the basis of which the censorship of cinema was justified and the mechanisms by which it would be practiced were already well established by the time the Supreme Court judgment. For example, in 1906, as cinema exhibition began to move into dedicated buildings, municipal governments determined that it was necessary to license the Nickelodeons or penny gaffs on the grounds of public safety, since they were seen as fire traps or health hazards. The regulation of content, though, okay, that became an afterthought. So as early as 1906, they were thinking about some form of regulation on the industry. This one was exhibition, not in a sense content, and that was in the early 1906. Okay. By 1908, municipal public safety regulations were being widely used as the pretext for local film censorship, a practice was that was strongly opposed to by the emerging national distribution industry. So the distributors did not want this censorship for obvious reasons. So what they do, the New York exhibitors formed a union to protect themselves from the closures of the MPPC. The MPCC called for censorship to protect them from film manufacturers who foisted improper pictures on them, and for the establishment of the board census. In the institutional function of the national board, the institutional function of the national board was to develop standardized formulas of accepted content, not only prohibiting the representation of particular actions, but encouraging the construction of narratives relying on a regulated set of conventions. Okay, so now we have this board. Okay, and the board is calling for a standardized development. It's calling for the development of a standardized formula that is acceptable to the public. So they're saying we need a sort of a template of what we can make, what will be allowed in the film industry. Here's an example. What the board declared against the crime genre. And this is them talking about the crime genre. The result of the crime should not be long-run disastrous to the criminal, so that the impression carried is that the crime will inevitably find one out, soon or late, and bring it to a catastrophe which causes the temporal gain from the crime to sink into insignificance. The result should spring logically and convincingly from the crime, and the results should take a reasonable proportion of the film. So they're regulating the narrative of certain genres that they think could be a threat to the fabric of society. And one of them, what they felt was the crime genre. And then they write, I'm on page 236, such narrative strategies demonstrated the respectability of motion pictures as an instrument for both ordering and explaining a dominant ideology, and there was an implicit political censorship in insisting on the triumph of virtue. So they're looking at this, they're looking at the morals of society, and now they're looking at film as a mechanism to deliver these morals. And so they're going to regulate it in a sense so that whatever comes out in certain genres reflects a specific ideology. Okay? The dominant ideology of the country at that time. This American pattern was repeated elsewhere. In 1909, Cinematograph Act in Britain required local authorities to issue licenses to cinemas as evidence that they met safety standards. But this power rapidly used as the basis of local censorship. So this model of censorship and self-regulation that was established in the U.S. is sort of taking on elsewhere. Most countries of Europe, South America, and the French and British empires enact censorship legislation between 1911 and 1920 and exact government control on grounds of national security during the First World War. As justification for censorship, the justification for censorship was invariably paternalistic. Cinema was held to exert a powerful influence over its viewers, particularly those of susceptible groups which comprised the bulk of its audience. And they're talking about children, workers, and those described by colonial rhetoric as the subject of race. I need to close this window. I'm sorry. Okay, I'm back. Sorry. So they justified this regulating film because of the power that the film exerted over the masses to change ideology and affect ideology. And this was happening around the world. And it varied. It varies around the world. Okay. Hollywood and self-regulation on page 237. Although in most countries the function of censorship was undertaken by a government-appointed agency, there was invariably a large element of industry participation in the process. So in Hollywood, the industry was participating in it. The aim of censorship was to police exhibition rather than to prohibit it. So they're looking at not stopping the exhibition, but to police it up. Let's clean it up. Let's not stop it. The industry is good right now. Let's clean it up. The aim of censorship, Those distributors and exhibitors recognized that it was their economic interest to cooperate with established censorship practices. Self-regulation was justified as an anticipatory form of cooperation, as well as a means of circumventing demands of more extensive government regulations of the industry. So their thought was, if we regulate ourselves, the government won't have to step in and regulate us. And if they step in and regulate us, no telling what they would do. So let's start a system of policing ourselves and keep this out of government hands. But in 1921, the Federal Trade Commission charged the infamous Players Lasky with monopolizing first-run exhibitions. And then there was this calls for the Senate Judiciary Committee to conduct an investigation into the political activities of the motion picture industry. These events led to the creation in March of 1922 of the the Motion Picture Producers and Distributions of America, the MPPDA, with former Postmaster General Will Hayes as president. Resisting the spread of state censorship and regulating movie content was only one aspect of the MPPDA's overall task of internally organizing the industry's affairs. So now they formed the MPPDA to officially police the film industry. In addition to municipal censorship, state censor boards now operated in 7 of the 48 states, and the MPPDA estimated that more than 60% of domestic exhibition, together with virtually the entire foreign market, was affected. This meant that the association's self-regulation comprised of an additional rather than a replacement censorship structure. So I'm on page 241 now, where we're moving on with what effects did the technological advantages of sound have on censorship. And unlike silent films, I'm reading directly from the book, the technological complexities of sound production necessitated a more exact arrangement. Unlike silent films, talkies could not be altered by local censors, regional distributors, or individual exhibitors without destroying synchronization. So you have sound is synchronized now. Before, you can edit a silent picture out and it wouldn't really affect anything. But now you have sound synced to the film. And if you start chopping a film up, it's going to really affect the sound and affect the original experience that the director and the studio intended that for the audience. In autumn of 1929, the association was the subject of heavy criticism for reasons of only tangibly connected to the movie content. Its relationship with the federal government had been strained by a wave of mergers and theaters buying among the major companies. They were under attack from several directions. Hayes seized on the regulation of film content as an area where the association might be able to demonstrate its usefulness to both the public and its members. In September of 1929, he initiated the revision of the 1927 Code. The Code, as they called it. All right. The interesting thing, Martin Quigley, a prominent Chicago Catholic, was involved in the association's work, and he proposed most of the elaborate code enunciating the moral principles underlying screen entertainment. He recruited a Jesuit father, Daniel Lord, to draft it up. I thought that was interesting, guys. So, the text of the code provided a list of prohibitions rather than moral arguments. Its particular applications elaborated the do's and don'ts and be carefuls, and added clauses on liquor, adultery, vulgarity, and obscenity. Lord's contribution was most visible in the three general principles that preceded the particular applications. So this code is now sort of giving the template of do's and don'ts for the time. Going on to page 245, into and after the war. So the war breaks out. Distinctly less trivial were the issues raised by the increasing political tensions in Europe and the world at large. In the United States itself, directly political censorship was mostly confined to the banning of some Soviet films by state or local censor boards. So they were not happy about Soviet films, and they were not showing them. Newsreels were generally exempted from state censorship, but they were made with a firm degree of self-regulation. And they avoided the coverage of crimes as well as political controversy. Meanwhile, Nazi Germany and Fascist Italy had instituted several censorship aimed at not only regulating the content of domestic production, but at controlling the content of American and other imports. While Japan and the Soviet Union not only practiced internal censorship, but had become effectively closed markets. So they had shut their markets off from the world, and they were only showing national films made by their own nation. If they were showing an American film, it would fit under heavy censorship laws. By the war's end, this brought a rapid change. Germany and Japan were subject to military censorship imposed by the occupying forces, and along with Italy, to a heavy influx of American movies, as Hollywood sought opportunities to continue to profit from its patriotism. So now you have the losing countries, Germany and Japan, are being regulated by military censorship. Okay, they can only make certain movies. So what does America do? They seize the opportunity to slide on in there and put some more American films in there. Okay. In 1953, the United States Supreme Court's decision in the Miracle case weakened the authority of the production code, right? But it did not destroy it. A Maryland court observed that if the production code were law, it would be plainly unconstitutional. If the PCA had relied on the sanctions of political censorship and the liberalization of standards in both America and Europe eroded that sanction. So, there you have it. Self-censorship and regulation. That's it. I'll see you guys on the next video.